Hello everybody, today we'll begin your examination of the computer hardware and learn the proper method of taking the personal computer apart. Let's begin by taking a look at the object of this exercise. The objects are very important because they give you a concrete way of knowing if you learned what you should have learned. The objective will generally be stated in this form. When you complete this exercise, you will be able to identify, disconnect and reconnect the computer cables and covers. Identify the external connector on a typically personal computer. Identify and explain the purpose of the majority external components. Read over the objective carefully and refer to them frequently as you complete this exercise. These some objectives are listed at the front of exercise in your workbook. Some of them may be covered in your reading assignment. When you have completed this lesson, you should double check to make sure you can perform each of them. In the hand or on part of the exercise, you will partially disassemble the computer. You may be wondering why would I want to disassemble a computer in the first place. There are several reasons why you will to do some level of disassemble. Perhaps the most frequent reason is to upgrade. Computer technology change very quickly. That state of the art computer you buy today may be out of the date in a year and obsolete in 2, unless it is upgraded. The best way to extend its useful life to upgrade it frequently. This may include adding more money. This may include adding more memory, changing to a large hard drive, or going to a faster model. Another reason for disassembly is repairing. Computer break. A hardware malfunction inside the computer requires some level of disassemble. Finally, you will have to do some disassemble to add a new capability such as sound card, a CD-ROM driver, a modem, or a network card. In this exercise, you will partially disassemble the computer so that you can become familiar and comfortable with the hardware and the procedure involved. The most important thing is to remember when you disassemble a computer is to document everything. It is embarrassing and sometimes costly to forget how everything goes back together. Your chance of getting everything back together properly increase dramatically when you have clear, detailed documentation. In particular, you should document where the various cards inside the computer are located, how the cables are routed and oriented, the hardware used, and anything else that may cause confusion when you start putting things back together. This is the documentation. When your cards are located, how cables are routed, oriented of cable and connectors, hardware used to secure each component, anything else that may cause confusion when reassembling. Let's spend a moment talking about electrostatic discharge, or ESD. When working inside the computer, more damage is done by electrostatic discharge than by any other single factor. In fact, anytime the computer is open, you risk damaging the circuit inside by electrostatic discharge. That is the bad news. The good news is this risk can almost totally eliminated by a few common sense precautions. Your first line of defense is the anti-static wrist strap. It is simply conductive strap. One end fits around your wrist, the other is clipped to ground on the computer. It will drain off any electrical charge that attempt to accumulate. It keeps your body and the computer charges at the same potential, virtually eliminating the risk of the ESD, electrostatics discharge. If you are concerned about deliberately grounding your body when working around electronics, set your mind at ease. A resistor built into the wrist strap limits the current to a safe level. Should inadvertent brush again, leave terminate. While the anti-static wrist strap greatly reduces the risk of ESD damage, there are some other precautions that should also be taken. Obviously, you should turn off power to the computer and those devices connect to it before you disconnect anything from the computer. Also, it's good practice to use anti-static mat on your workbench and on the floor where you will be standing. These are conducting mats that, when properly grounded, prevent the building up of static electricity. Circuit boards are especially vulnerable when they are unplugged from the computer. You should be very careful to handle the board only by their edges. Avoid touching the components, the foil patterns, and the connector on the board. When not used, boards should be kept in conducting anti-static bags. This simple precaution will go a long way towards eliminating the danger of electrostatic discharge damage. Now, let's look at a few tips for disassemble the computer. The first step is to turn off power to the computer and to anything else that is connected to it, such as the monitor and printer. Never connected or disconnect cable from live equipment. Once power is removed, disconnect the external cable. Disconnect the monitor and set it aside. The monitor is connected to the so-called VGA connector on the computer. Once disconnected, you can recognize the VGA connector by its 15 pins arranged in 3 rows of 5 pins each. Disconnect the keyboard and set it aside. Some keyboards use large round 5-pin connector called a DIN plug, D-I-N-A, DIN plug. Disconnect the mouse and set it aside. Many computers use a serial mouse that connect to the COM1 serial ports. In this case, the connector is a 9-pin D-shaped affair with the male end connected to the mouse. Once everything is disconnected, you are ready to remove the cover. On this computer, the cover is held in the place by 4 screws that are accessible from the back of the unit. Look for the 4 screws along the narrow lip of the cover where it overlaps the back of the computer, indicated here by the arrow. If If the computer has a one-piece cover, you need to remove all 4 screws. If the computer has side panel, then you only have to remove the screws for one side. Looking at the back, that would be the right side panel. Be careful. Be very careful that you do not take this screw out by mistake. This hold the heavy power supply in place, as you will see later from inside the computer. Once the cover screws are removed, lifting the cover off is two-step procedure. First, slide the cover straight back a few inches. Then, tilt the back of the cover up and lift it off as shown here. Spreading the side of the cover makes it easier to lift off the computer. Don't overdo the spreading. Flex the cover just enough to clear the side of the computer. If your computer uses side panels, you only have to remove the side shown here. Once the 2 panel screws are removed, slide the panel straight back about an inch. Then tilt the top of the panel out. Finally, lift it off. With the cover off, the inside of the computer looks something like this. There are 5 main items that are of immediate concern. The large board that occupies the lower left quarter of the chassis is called the motherboard. This single board contains the microprocessor, the various buses, and the interface circuit. It also provides bus slot and socket for a wide range of the expansion boards. The motherboard may be called a variety of names. Throughout its history, it has been various called the system board, the planner board, the base board, the main board, and the logic board. In this course, we will call it the motherboard. Another very prominent item that is easy to find is in any computer is the power supply. It is usually a metal cage with AC outlet accessible through the chassis on one side and a bundle of colorful cable on the other. The power supply converts the AC line voltage into high level DC voltage used by the various components inside the computer. This is standard computer power supply. One end plugged into the wall outlet where 120 voltage alternating current is provided, and the other end provided low voltage direct current. The connector on the bottom is used for a standard 3-wire line cord. The top connector uses specially line cord that designed for your monitor. This allows you to power your system with only one line outlet, unless you have an electronic device. A technician never opens the power supply. Consider it a replicable model. The fan is commonly power supply can fail, and when they do, you replace the entire supply. Power supply are cheap, and the circuit inside the dangerous. The most power supply have a switch on the rear panel. This switch allows the system to be used with the 2 different AC line voltages. In North America, the switch should always be in the 115 position. Some supplies calls it 110, some 120. They are all mean the same things. The 230 position is used in the other part of the world. This setting normally require different type of line cord. Pay attention to this warning, which is on nearly every power supply every build. There are hazardous voltage present even when the supply is not attached to the wall outlet. The circuit inside a power supply can store dangerous charges, which are hazardous if not handled properly. Don't open the power supply case. There are many colors cable coming out of the power supply. They connect to the motherboard and the drivers. Sometimes the CPU fan is connected to one of these cables, and other internal peripheral may be attached as well. Two types of PC power supply are commonly today. With the so-called AT type, the output voltage produced by the power supply are plus 5 voltage DC, plus 12 voltage DC, minus 12 voltage DC, and minus 5 voltage DC. The connectors from the AT type power supply to the motherboard most often take this form. There are two connectors usually labeled P8 and P9. They plug into single jack on the motherboard. Unfortunately, they can be connected incorrectly. The correct connection is with the black lead side by side in the middle as shown here. Another way to remember the correct connection is that P9 should always be closest to the edge of the board. Another common type PC power supply is the ATX types. With the ATX type PC, the output voltage of the power supply are plus 5 voltage DC, plus 12 voltage DC, minus 12 voltage DC, minus 5 voltage DC, and plus 3.3 voltage DC. The power connection to the motherboard is also simplified by using a single 20-pin connector rather than the two 6-pin connector required by the AT type boards, because the supplied voltages and connectors are different. The AT and the ATX power supply are not interchangeable. The AT motherboard has a single 20-pin power connector. If you look closely, you will notice that this connector will not allow the cable to be attached incorrectly. With the ATX style motherboard that support the Pentium 4 processor, power is supplied to the separate location. Main power still comes from the 20-pin connectors I just described. A second 4-pin power connector supplied to additional 12-volt line to the support increased current damage of the CPU. All PC power supply distribute voltage to the various drives and fan using two types of connectors. The 4-pin Molex connectors and its socket are shown here. This type of connector often used to supply power to hard disk drive, CD-ROM driver, and some old 1/5-inch floppy disk drivers. Sometimes you will find one or two extra Molex connector coming out of the power supply. These are for future expansion. The Molex connector is keyed so that it can only be connected in one direction. Another type of power connector is the 4-pin Berg Connector. It is normally used to provide power to the 3/2-inch floppy disk driver. A necessary step in disassembling the computer is to unplug these various power supply connectors. Care should be taken when doing this. First, determine whether or not there is a latch holding the connector in place. If so, you must lift the latches before attempting to wiggle the connector loose. Second, grasp the connector by the plastic shell. Wiggle it up and down and end to end while pulling slightly on the shell. Never pull the wire leads. Now, let's look at some of the other components in the computer. Most computers have CD-ROM driver. A typical locate for the CD driver is shown here. In your computer, the hard drive is probably located here, although it will fit in several locations. Wherever it is located, it will have two cables attached, the power cable and a 40-pin flat ribbon cable. Notice that the flat cable has a strip on the one side. This identifies the edge of the cable that contain pin 1. Be sure that to document the orientation of this cable before disconnecting it from the hard drive. Once the cables are disconnected, the 4 screws that hold the drive to the chassis can be removed and the drive can be lifted out of the computer. A typical hard drive cable will look like this. It has 2 connectors near one end and 1 connector at the other. The lone connector attached to the motherboard. The cable supports 2 hard drives, so which connector do you use? When 2 IDE hard drives are attached by the single cable, one is the master, the other is the slave. If a single drive is used, it must be the master. The master should be attached to the end connector as shown here. Since you have a single drive, it is the master and it should be attached to the end connector. If you are using a second hard drive on this cable, it would be the slave and it would be connected here. Here are some tips to keep in mind when working with ribbon cables. Here you see a typical location for the floppy disk driver. Like the hard drive, the floppy drive has a power cable and a flat ribbon cable. However, once everything is disconnected, the floppy disk driver usually slides in and out the front of the computer. The floppy disk driver is held in place by 4 screws with 2 on each side. Some computers use latching rails to secure the drive in place. The most confusing part of installing a floppy disk driver is connecting the ribbon cable. Often, the floppy disk driver cable will have 5 connectors like this one. Without good documentation, it can be intimidating. Let's see if we can sorting things out. First, notice that there are 4 connectors near one end of the cable and one lone connector on the other end. This lone connector goes to the motherboard. Next, let's turn our attention to the 4 connectors at the other end. Notice that 2 are large and 2 are small. The 2 larger connectors are designed to fit the older and the larger 1/4 inch floppy disk driver. The smaller connectors are designed to fit 3 1/2 inch floppy disk driver. You know that your computer uses a single 3 1/2 inch floppy driver, so obviously it uses one of these smaller connectors, but which one? Fortunately, they are an easy way to remember. Your floppy driver is called and is confused as drive A. If you added a second floppy, you would configuring it as drive B. Which drive goes where is determined by the twist in the cable. Starting from the motherboard and following the cable outward, drive A attached to the connector after the twist. Drive B attached to connector before the twist. Simple, remember. A is after, B is before. Another task that you have to do frequently is remove or replace an ICA expansion board that is plugged into the motherboard. There is a proper way to remove these boards. First, remove the screw that secures the ICA boards to the back panel of the chassis. Your computer uses only one screw. We will be discussing ICA expansion slot in the later exercise. With the screw removed, grasp the board by the top edge and gently rock the board end to end. Do not rock it side to side and do not flex the board. Rock the board end to end until it is free. Then lift the board up and out of the computer. Place the board immediately into an anti-static bag. Video boards installed in AGP slot are shown here. Require special attention. Do not rock them. Pull them straight up and out. Everything that can be removed from the computer with commonly hand tool like a screwdriver is called a field replicable unit or FRU. As the name implies, these are the type of units that can be replaced in the field. Normally, components that must be desoldered are not repaired in the field. There you have it. You are not ready to try your luck at examining the computer. Keep these tips in mind as you do it. Documentation everything in enough detail so that you can put the computer back together again. Shut off the power before disconnecting anything. Protect against electrostatic discharge. Always wear an anti-static wrist strap when the computer is open. When removing connectors, grasp them by their shells. Never pull on the leads. Never use excess forces. If something do not come loose using reasoning or reasonable forces. Look for latch tabs or screw holding its place. Remove daughter boards from the motherboard by rocking them end to end with reasonable precautions. You can take the computer apart and put it back together again so that it works the first time everything. Be sure to follow this advice as you proceed to the hands on the exercise.